Well, today is Memorial Day. Memorial Day is all about remembering. I want to share with you a story. Have you ever heard of the guy named John who had a serious memory problem? One day John ran into a friend and he'd not seen in a long time, and he greeted him and said, "Bill, do you remember what a bad memory I had?" And Bill answered, "Yes, I certainly do." "Well, it's not bad anymore. I went to a seminar and they taught us how to remember things. It was great. And now I have a wonderful memory." And Bill says, "Great. What's the name of the seminar?" And John says, "Well, wait a minute. My wife went with me. I'll ask her." And he turns and he sees his wife nearby. Then he turns back to Bill and says, "What's the name of that flower with a long stem and thorns and a red bloom?" "Do you mean a rose?" Bill answered. "Yeah, thanks. Hey, Rose, what was the name of that seminar that we went to?" There are things that we just should never forget, right? Our name of our wife is one of them, that's for sure, right? We just never should forget. Memorial Day is about remembering those fallen soldiers who fought for our freedom. Who fought and died, actually, for our freedom. We're remembering their death and honoring them for their sacrifice. But I want to talk about some other things that are important for us to remember. We're going to talk about this. Throughout the Bible, when God did something amazing for His people, they would do things to make sure they remembered what God did. Why? Why was it important to remember what God did? To remember the great miracles of God? Because each memory lays a foundation stone of your faith in God. Your faith and also your understanding of His character. If we fail to remember these important things, it handicaps our faith. It handicaps our understanding of who God is. And so I want to take a minute and I want to look at three things that we need to make sure we never forget, that we always remember. And the first one is we need to remember the miracles God has done for us. This is so important. If God miraculously heals you of an illness, that becomes a significant marker in your life. From now on, you will always be able to trust and have faith in God for healing because you've experienced Him. You've experienced that healing for yourself. It's not just a story in the Bible. It's not somebody else's story. It's your story. You experienced this. When a friend or neighbor is going through a serious illness, you will have faith to pray for healing for them that maybe somebody else who hasn't experienced that miracle may not have or may struggle to have. You have a faith in God because of that experience. Your faith is strengthened by that experience. And your experience becomes a foundation stone of your faith in God. But not only does it bolster your faith, it also gives you insight into God's character. That becomes a part of your foundation as well. Listen, when God miraculously provides for you in a way that maybe your mortgage, you were about to be foreclosed on your home, and God miraculously provides that mortgage payment, and you're able to avoid that situation. That speaks about God's character, doesn't it? It says that, number one, God cares about you. It says He's faithful to keep His promise to provide all you need. It says He is mighty, that there's nothing He can't provide. This is why it's throughout the Bible, they did things to remember what God had done. Because those memories help us to have faith for what we need in the present and to deepen our understanding of who God is. So I want to share with you a story from the Israelites in the Bible about the Israelites of a time when God did something amazing, and they did something to make sure that they remembered it. And I want to share this with you. It comes, the Israelites, they had left Egypt. They'd wandered the desert for 40 years. They were finally ready to enter the promised land. And to do so, they had to cross the Jordan River. And the Jordan River at this time was at flood stage, so it was deep and it was rushing. This is not an easy cross, okay? And I want you to see what God does. In Joshua 3:12-17, it says this: "Now choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. The priests will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall." So the people left their camp to cross the Jordan, and the priests who were carrying the ark of the covenant went ahead of them. It was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away at a town called Adam, which is near Zarethan. And the water below that point flowed on to the Dead Sea until the riverbed was dry. Then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho. Meanwhile, the priests who were carrying the ark of the Lord's covenant stood on dry ground in the middle of the riverbed as the had crossed on dry ground. Now that's pretty amazing, isn't it? God has stopped at the river so that they could walk on dry ground and cross to the other side. So I want you to see what they did. In Joshua 4:1-7, it says this: "When all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, 'Now choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan. Carry them out and pile them up at a place where you will camp tonight.' So Joshua called together the 12 men he had chosen, one from each of the tribes of Israel. He told them, 'Go into the middle of the Jordan in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it out on your shoulder. 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them, they remind us." Get that? They remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across. These stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever. The monument was to stand as a reminder to all the Israelites about the miracle that God had performed for them. So they would always remember how powerful God is and how He helps His people. So let me ask you this: what miracles has God done in your life that you need to remember? What are some miracles that God has done in your life that you need to constantly remind yourself? You know, we had some friends who, I love what they did. They had what they called Ebenezer stones. They'd have like this little bowl on their coffee room table. And in that bowl would be these river stones. And on each river stone would be something they would write. And it would be a memory of when God did something for them. A miracle or something in their life. And they would pile it up. And it was just, one of them was going through cancer at the time. And so it was just kind of a way to remind them of how powerful God is. How mighty He is. Because you go through that pile of these stones and you keep bringing them up and you're like, wow, that's right, God did this. He healed me back here. He provided back here. Look, wow, I remember that. And it strengthens your faith. That's exactly what these Israelites were doing. And listen, we always want to remember what God did for us. We never want to forget that. But there's something else that we need to remember as well. We need to remember God's miracles, but we also need to remember the forgiveness of God. We should never forget the forgiveness of God. For the Israelites, God did an amazing miracle in the history of Israel that represented God's forgiveness. It was when they were still in Egypt. And God had sent all the plagues upon the on the Egyptians. And he had just tore the Egyptians up. But there was one plague left. He was going to kill every firstborn male of the animals and of the people. But to spare the Israelites, he gave them some instructions. He says, listen, every firstborn male is going to be killed. Yours included, unless you do this. And he told them to do some very specific things. And what they had to do is they had to take a lamb and sacrifice that lamb. And then take the blood of that lamb and paint the door frames of their house. And then when that angel of death came to kill all the firstborn males, when it came to the house of the Israelites and saw that blood covering their doorposts, it would pass by. That's why they call it the Passover. This is what it says in verse 12. We're going to jump down to verse 12. It says this, on that night I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son and every firstborn male animal in the land of Egypt. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. But the blood on your doorposts will serve as a sign, marking the houses where you are staying. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. This plague of death will not touch you when I strike the land of Egypt. This is a day to remember. Each year, from generation to generation, you must celebrate it as a special festival to the Lord. This is a law for all time. The Passover feast was meant to be a reminder of how God passed over the Israelites on that day. He spared them. Now the Israelites were spared from punishment, but the truth is they were no better than the Egyptians, right? I mean, if you study that book of Exodus, you see the Israelites, and they were a bunch of complainers. They even worshipped other gods sometimes. I mean, they were not necessarily better than the Egyptians, but God spared them. And the reason he spared them was the simple fact that they painted the doorpost of their home with the lamb's blood. It was because of that lamb's sacrifice that they passed over. And this is all, the Passover is just a foreshadowing of what Jesus did in the New Testament. What Jesus did on the cross, right? The lamb represents Jesus, and the death of the lamb represents Jesus' death on the cross. And here's the thing. You and I are unworthy of his forgiveness. Just like the Israelites were unworthy of God's forgiveness, we were unworthy. And yet, he died for us anyway. And that's why we take communion. It's our way of remembering that sacrifice. Remembering that forgiveness. Why is that so important? Why do we need to make sure that we remember? Two reasons. Excuse me. The first is that we should remember how unworthy we were. And yet he died for us. And because we received that mercy, that undeserved mercy, it should motivate us to live a life that pleases him. You see, our life should be the memorial. Our life should be the memorial that reminds everybody, this is what Christ did. He forgave them. The second reason is so that we show the same forgiveness towards others that he showed to us. You see, if we don't remember the fact that we were undeserving, and the only reason that we're forgiven is because of the sacrifice of Jesus, if we forget that, then we start to think that we deserve heaven. We deserve the mercy. We're so much better than those people out there. But that's not true. We were undeserving. And so when someone does something to you that hurts you or harms you, it is so important that you remember how God responded to you when you had done all those things to hurt and offend him. He forgave you. He showed you mercy. The third thing that we need to remember is we need to remember the promises God has fulfilled in our life. In the Old Testament, they would build altars or monuments to remind them of the promises of God that God had made to them. They did that so they would know when God fulfilled his promise. It was a way to inspire hope for the future. In the Old Testament, there was a man named Jacob, and he was kind of a conniving man. And he did some things that angered his family, especially his brother Esau. In fact, it got so bad that Jacob had to flee from his brother because his brother wanted to kill him. So Jacob left everything he'd ever known. He left his mother, his father, the rest of his family. He left the land that he was familiar with. And I'm sure that he felt alone. And one day, he gets to a spot and he camps and he falls asleep. And he has this amazing encounter with God. Literally, he sees this stairway where the angels are coming up and down from heaven. And he has this amazing encounter with God, and God speaks to him. And God gives him a promise. And it says this, I am the Lord your God. I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on it on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. So Jacob had this amazing encounter with God. And God made a promise to Jacob, listen, I'm going to bring you back to this place. Jacob was probably freaking out, probably saying, I'm never going to see my home again because my brother's going to kill me. But God said, no, I'm going to bring you back. And so Jacob builds a monument to remind him of the promise of God. What are some promises that God has made you that you need to remember? Those promises can be a source of hope because God never breaks his word. God never breaks his word to us. Listen to this in Numbers 23:19. It says this, God is not a human being and he will not lie. He is not a human and he does not change his mind. What he says he will do, he does. What he promises, he makes come true. I want to share with you just a couple of general promises that we can find for all believers. These are promises of God that you can count on. Listen to this. In Matthew 6:31 through 33, it says this, so don't worry about these things, saying, what will we eat? What will we drink? What will we wear? These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers, but your heavenly Father already knows all your needs. Seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and He will give you everything you need. Hebrews 13:5 says this, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Those are some amazing promises that we can count on. God will provide all of our needs. We don't have to worry about what we eat, what we wear, none of those things. We never have to feel alone, right? No matter what we go through, no matter where we are, God is with us. And He will never leave us. Those are some promises that can give you hope, especially in times of trouble. But the people of the Old Testament not only built monuments to remind them of the promises of God, but they would build monuments when God fulfilled His promises. Jacob, long after God had brought him back home, fulfilled His promise, Jacob built another monument. And it says this in Genesis 35:1-7. Then God said to Jacob, go up to Bethel and settle there and build an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, get rid of the foreign gods you have with you and purify yourselves and change your clothes. Then come, let us go up to Bethel, where I will build an altar to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and who has been with me wherever I have gone. Jacob and all the people with him came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. There he built an altar, and he called the place El Bethel, because it was there that God revealed Himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. Why build another monument? Because this monument was a reminder of God's faithfulness. The first monument was just a promise that God had made. It was to remind him, this is a promise that God has made me. I can have hope. But the second monument was a reminder of God's faithfulness. This is what God did. He came through. We need to remind ourselves of all the times that God has fulfilled His promises in our lives. Do you know what happens when you're going through a tremendous trial or ordeal in your life and you're stressed? Maybe you're freaking out. Maybe you don't know what to do. When you begin to list out all of the times when God has come through for you, you know what happens? That fear begins to melt. Suddenly, you begin to have faith. Faith in your present situation. God is faithful. My family and I have been going through some stuff, and I did this very thing I'm telling you to do right now this week. I was stressed, and I came in this room, and I was praying, and I just began to list out all the things I could remember that God has done. I'm like, God, thank you. You provided a house for my family. When I thought we would never be able to afford one for a long, long time, you provided a house for us. God, thank you for the 2 cars that you have provided for my family for free. God, thank you for healing my back so much. I am so much stronger than I have been. God, I just began to go down the list. And the more I went down the list, the more was coming to my mind. Wait, you did this too, and you did that. Suddenly, all that fear began to melt away, and I'm like, I'm getting excited. Because I know that I'm in a situation where God has an opportunity to do something amazing again. That's what happens when you remember. You remind yourself of those promises. You remind yourself of God's faithfulness. Suddenly that fear begins to melt. You begin to see your current situation as simply an opportunity for God to show Himself faithful again. Memorial Day is all about remembering. But I hope that you do more than just remember fallen soldiers. Those are important. We need to remember them. But there's some things that you need to remember also. You need to remember God's faithfulness. You need to remember the miracles that He's done. You need to remember the promises that He's made you. You need to remember the times when He's fulfilled those promises. You need to remember His forgiveness. We should never forget these things.